The Force is old and full of shadows.
The last thing he sees is Luke's face. Not the mask, not the black armor or the respirator or the cape. All of that is gone, stripped away in the throne room's fire, and what remains is just his son's face, wet with tears, refusing to look away. Luke is holding him. The Emperor is dead. The Death Star is dying around them in slow, structural groans, and Anakin Skywalker, not Vader, Anakin, for the first time in 23 years, feels the weight leave his body like a tide going out. He closes his eyes. He expects nothing. What he gets instead is the smell of sand, not the clean emptiness of space, not darkness. Sand, mineral and dry and faintly metallic, the specific smell of Tatooine's grit that no other desert in the galaxy quite replicates, baked into every surface of every room he'd spent his first 9 years inside. His eyes open to a ceiling he recognizes before his mind catches up to recognizing it. Rough-cut stone. A water reclamation pipe running along the left wall, the small vent near the floor where the twin suns leaked orange light in the early morning. He is lying on a straw mattress. He raises his hands. Small, brown, unblemished, 10 fingers, all his own. No durasteel, no cortosis weave, no phantom ache where the prosthetics met flesh. He turns them over once, slowly, the way a man checks a wound he isn't sure is real. From the other room, Shmi's voice. Ani. Breakfast. 2 words. Completely ordinary. The kind of words that had been spoken in this room 10,000 times before, and would have been spoken 10,000 more if he hadn't left. He doesn't move for a long moment. The ceiling blurs. He makes himself breathe. The assessment comes in pieces, the way field triage always had. Identify the situation. Identify the assets. Identify the timeline. His mind, still Vader's mind, still that vast cold strategic instrument, begins to run the numbers before his body has fully remembered how to sit up. Tatooine. The slave quarters in Mos Espa. The light angle through the vent suggests early morning, 2 hours before the market opens, maybe 3. The smell of the breakfast Shmi is preparing carries moisture grain and whatever protein she'd managed to barter for, which means it is not a good week, but not the worst kind either. The pod race is not yet scheduled. Watto hasn't yet been approached by 2 Jedi traveling with a queen in disguise, which means Qui-Gon Jinn is alive. Which means today is the day it begins. He sits up. The mattress creaks under 8 stone of 9-year-old boy, and the sound is so absurdly small after decades of the floor shuddering beneath durasteel boots that something in his chest cracks sideways. Not grief. Not quite. Something older than grief. Something that has been waiting for a very long time to be allowed to exist again. He breathes through it. He stands. Shmi looks up when he enters the kitchen. She is at the heating unit with her back to him, and she turns with the particular economy of movement that comes from years of living carefully in a small space, and her face when she sees him is just her face. Tired, warm, already forming the small, private smile she always reserved for mornings, before the heat became brutal. "You slept late," she said. "A little," Anakin said. His own voice startles him, high and unbroken, a child's instrument. He keeps his face still with the practice of a man who spent 2 decades wearing a mask, and crosses the room, and sits down at the table, and when Shmi sets a bowl in front of him and turns back to the unit, he reaches out and takes her hand. She goes still. He holds it for 3 seconds. He doesn't say anything. There is nothing to say that wouldn't require him to explain everything, and he can't explain everything, and so he just holds her hand, the roughness of her palm, the specific architecture of her knuckles, and memorizes it the way he should have the first time. "Ani," she said, not quite a question. "I'm fine," he said. "Just, good morning." She looked at him for a moment with the expression she had always used when she suspected he was hiding something important. Then she squeezed his hand once and went back to breakfast. He ate. He didn't taste it. The pod race is 3 days later. He doesn't remember it being this easy. Not the flying, The flying was always easy. The flying was the one thing that had always been easy. But what he'd expected was the fear. In every memory of this race he carried, there had been fear underneath the competence. The specific fear of a child who knew that losing meant Qui-Gon's ship was forfeit, and the Queen never reached Coruscant, and the Republic fell in slow motion 30 years later. He'd been 9 years old and carrying the weight of that without knowing what it was. He is 9 years old now, and he knows exactly what it is. He settles into the cockpit of the Radon Ulzer like coming home. The other racers are noise and aggression on either side of him. Sebulba's engine's cyclone orange heat to his left. The starting grid vibrates under his landing struts. He runs the ignition sequence with his eyes mostly closed. Feeling the plasma feeds in the Force the way a surgeon feels a scalpel, not with his hands but with something underneath his hands. The flag drops. He wins, not narrowly, not in a surge of adrenaline and last-second instinct. He wins the way a man who has already lived this wins, with a 30-second lead by the canyon run, and a clean, unhurried finish that leaves the crowd confused about whether they actually saw what they saw. There is no drama. There is no fear. There is just the landing, and the dust settling, and Qui-Gon Jinn watching him from across the track, with an expression that is trying very hard to remain neutral and failing. Watto is the part that requires care. He finds the Toydarian in the hangar after the crowds have thinned, doing what Watto always did after losing a bet, inventorying things he still owned as a consolation. Anakin comes in alone, without Qui-Gon, and waits until Watto looks up. "We need to talk about the terms," Anakin said. Watto's wings buzzed with irritation. "You won, boy. Your Jedi friend won. I pay the debt. That's the terms. I want a different arrangement." A pause. Watto's small eyes narrowed. "You want what?" Anakin kept his voice even. He had spent 23 years as Darth Vader making people feel the specific discomfort of his attention, and he had learned, far too late, and at far too great a cost, that the same pressure worked better quiet than loud. He let it sit in the room for a moment. That stillness, that unchildlike patience. "My freedom," he said. "And my mother's. Both of us. Today, you're worth twice what she." "You lost a race you expected to win," Anakin said to a 9-year-old, "on a track you know better than any other in the Outer Rim. That's going to be the story told about you in every cantina between here and Nal Hutta." He tilted his head, very slightly. "Unless the story is that you were gracious about it." Watto stared at him. Anakin didn't push with the Force, not exactly. He simply let the absolute certainty of what he wanted flow outward, the way a deep current moves beneath a surface, the way confidence becomes its own kind of gravity. Watto was not a strong mind. He was not a weak one either. But he was, above all things, a businessman, and Anakin gave him something to calculate instead of something to resist. The Toydarian's wings slowed. His expression shifted, degree by degree, from irritation to the look of a man renegotiating something he already knew he'd lost. "Fine," Watto said. "Both of you." "Done." Anakin nodded once, formally, and left before anything else could be said. He tells Shmi that night. He watches her face move through 5 different kinds of disbelief and come out the other side into something that isn't yet joy. It is too raw and too sudden to be joy, but is headed there. She holds him. He lets her. He breathes the smell of her hair and the dust in it, and all the years of careful, quiet love she had built around him in this place. And he thinks about the road that begins tomorrow. Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the ship, Coruscant, all of it waiting, exactly where he left it. He thinks about a man who is 25 years old right now, somewhere above this desert, doing his level best to feel nothing, and succeeding just well enough to be lonely. "I won't let you carry this alone this time." The Naboo Royal Cruiser smells like recycled air and machine oil and something faintly floral, a humidity system running too warm for the desert, overcompensating. Anakin notices it the moment he steps through the boarding ramp and into the corridor, and his body registers the contrast before his mind does. Cool floors under his feet, smooth walls without grit, light that comes from panels instead of suns. He spent 9 years on Tatooine and 23 more in armor that recycled the same dead air in an endless loop. He stands in the corridor and breathes the recycled air of the cruiser and thinks, clean. Just that. The word rises up from somewhere uncomplicated, and he lets it. Qui-Gon moves ahead of him with the long, unhurried stride of a man accustomed to walking into complicated situations and declining to be hurried by them. He is speaking to a crew member in the tone he uses when he's being diplomatically efficient, warm on the surface, privately elsewhere. Anakin follows, quiet, watching. He already knows what is about to happen. The knowing sits differently than he expected. He'd thought, in the 3 days between Watto's hangar and this corridor, that returning to these moments would feel like watching a holo movie he'd already seen, distant and flat, predetermined. Instead, it feels like walking back into a burning building you once escaped. All the same heat, all the same specific danger. But this time you know where the exits are. Qui-Gon stops at the entrance to the main cabin and gestures for Anakin to come alongside him. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," he said. Obi-Wan Kenobi is standing at the viewport. He has his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of a man performing composure. The posture Anakin had watched him hold for 2 decades of war. Of council chambers, of diplomatic briefings in which the situation was already lost, and Obi-Wan had decided that bearing was the last thing he could control. He is 25 years old. His beard is not yet fully committed to itself. He turns when Qui-Gon speaks his name, and his face does the thing it always did when Qui-Gon introduced a new variable into his carefully ordered situation. A single controlled blink, a fractional rearrangement, and then the pleasant, professional expression that means nothing at all. His eyes move to Anakin. "This is Anakin," Qui-Gon said. "He'll be traveling with us to Coruscant. I'll explain more when the Queen's business allows." Of course, Master the voice is the one Anakin knows, warm grain under formal finish, like good wood in a cold room. The tone is not unkind. It is also not, precisely, welcoming. It is the voice of a man who has learned to greet Qui-Gon's strays with equanimity rather than feeling. Because equanimity costs him less. Obi-Wan looks at him the way he'd been trained to look at children in a war zone. A rapid, quiet inventory. Age, condition, threat level, logistical complication. He completes this inventory in approximately 2 seconds and arrives at his conclusion: 9 years old, desert thin, untrained, civilian, minimal logistical complication if handled correctly. Anakin watches him reach this conclusion. He brings his feet together and bows. Not the tentative, approximated bow of a child who has seen the gesture and is attempting to copy it. A correct bow. Weight forward, spine straight, hands at the sides. The precise inclination of acknowledgement. The gesture Anakin had spent years learning to read across every rank in the order. The bow Obi-Wan himself had been using since he was 11, to greet the seniors above him. Anakin adds the extra degree of inclination, the one that belongs to a rank Obi-Wan does not yet hold. He is still a Padawan. Anakin gives him the knight's bow anyway. Obi-Wan's pleasant expression doesn't change. His eyes do. "It's an honor," Anakin said. He kept his voice steady, the flat, factual tone that was the easiest register to hold, because it required the least performance. "I have a feeling we're going to know each other for a long time." A beat of silence. Qui-Gon makes a small sound that might be amusement, poorly concealed. "Do you?" Obi-Wan said. Not a question. The word "do" is doing a great deal of work. Yes. Anakin meets his eyes. He lets himself do this for exactly as long as is natural, and not 1 second longer. Because he has 45 years of practice reading Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he knows precisely how much directness this version of him can receive, before it tips from disarming into alarming. "I think you're going to be very important to me." The color that moves across Obi-Wan's face is not a flush exactly. It is the involuntary physical response of someone who has been handed something they weren't prepared to receive and cannot immediately categorize. Warmth without a source, a current beneath the surface, a key turning in a lock he didn't know he'd been keeping. It lasts perhaps a second and a half. He looks away first. "You should find somewhere to sit," Obi-Wan said. "Hyperspace transition in 20 minutes. Are you prone to nausea?" "No," Anakin said. Good, he turns back to the viewport. The conversation is, apparently, concluded. Qui-Gon catches Anakin's eye over Obi-Wan's shoulder and raises one eyebrow in an expression that is 70% amusement and 30% genuine curiosity. Anakin keeps his face neutral, which takes more effort than the bow did. He finds a place to sit near the forward bulkhead, close enough to watch the cabin without it being conspicuous. The Queen's handmaidens move through the space in their quiet, coordinated way. Two of Panika's guards run a gear check in the corridor behind him. The ship hums through its pre-jump sequence, a low vibration in the floor. Obi-Wan returns to the viewport. Anakin watches him stand there, hands behind his back, and thinks about the 23 years he'd spent telling himself that this man had failed him. The lie had been load-bearing. Vader had needed it the way a bad structure needs bad architecture. Removing it would have required rebuilding everything, and there had been no one left to rebuild with. Obi-Wan had not failed him. He had been handed an impossible thing by a dying man, alone, at 25, and had done his level best for 13 years, until Anakin had made choices that no training and no bond and no love in the galaxy could have prevented. The equation was not complicated, from this distance. It had only seemed complicated when grief needed something to blame. The ship drops into hyperspace. The stars outside the viewport become light, become lines, become the white corridor of the jump, and Obi-Wan's reflection resolves in the transparisteel, his face in negative against the brightness, and for a fraction of a second. Before he reorders his expression, he looks very young, and very alone, and not entirely certain he knows what just happened to him. Anakin looks away before Obi-Wan can catch him looking. They don't speak again until the third hour of the jump. It is Obi-Wan who comes to him. This is not what happened before. Before, it was Qui-Gon's encouragement and Anakin's boundless social energy that had done the work of that transit. Now there is no social energy. There is just a 9-year-old sitting with his back against a bulkhead, and his eyes open. Not asleep, not fidgeting, not doing any of the things children in strange places do when they don't know what to do with themselves. Obi-Wan sits down across from him with the air of a man running an errand he has talked himself into. "You should sleep," he said. "We have a long journey ahead." "I know," Anakin said. "I don't need as much sleep as most people." A pause. "I never have." Obi-Wan studies him with the look he usually reserved for problems he hadn't yet found the correct framework for. "Where did you learn that bow?" "I taught myself." "Not entirely untrue. I watched a lot of people." "Slaves on Tatooine don't generally have cause to bow to Jedi." "No," Anakin agreed. "They don't." He offers nothing more. He waits. In the particular way he'd learned was more effective than any explanation, the way that made the other person's curiosity do the work. Obi-Wan's mouth tightens, not with irritation, but with the expression of someone who has followed an argument to a logical end and found the end unsatisfying. "What did Qui-Gon tell you about me?" he said, finally. "Almost nothing." Another silence. The hyperspace tunnel blazes white at the viewport behind Obi-Wan's head, framing him in light. "Why does it feel?" Obi-Wan said slowly, carefully, as though testing the weight of each word like "you already know me?" Anakin looks at him for a long moment. He lets the question exist between them without rushing to fill it. "I don't know," he said. "Does it bother you?" Obi-Wan considers this with the same gravity he would bring to a tactical question. "No," he said. The honesty in it sounds like it surprised him. "That's what bothers me." Coruscant from above looks like a fever dream of light. No darkness between the structures. No negative space. No horizon that isn't built. Just the planet city spreading in every direction beneath the cruiser's descent. Towers and transit lanes and the deep arterial glow of 10 trillion lives stacked on top of each other in a civilization so dense it has forgotten what ground looks like. Anakin has seen it from orbit 100 times. He has seen it burning. He has seen it at the precise moment it stopped being a republic and became something else, the way a living thing becomes a body, all at once, and then forever. He watches it through the viewport and keeps his breathing even. Beside him, Obi-Wan watches it too. He has the look he gets before a council appearance, the almost imperceptible tightening around the eyes, the stillness that isn't calm but is trying very hard to be. Anakin has read that expression for 2 decades. Reading it now, on a face that doesn't yet know him well enough to hide from him, is a strange kind of grief. "First time leaving Tatooine," Obi-Wan said. A statement, not a question. "Yes," Anakin said. "It's overwhelming for most people. I imagine it is." Obi-Wan waits for the rest of the sentence. It doesn't come. He looks at Anakin with that look again, the unsatisfied framework look, and says nothing further. The cruiser banks into its approach lane and the temple comes into view, 5 spires catching the morning light above the cityscape, ancient and white and unchanged. The knowledge sits in his chest like a stone. The council chamber at the temple's peak holds 12 seats in a circle, and 11 of them are occupied when Anakin enters with Qui-Gon. He has been here before. He has stood in this exact spot, in this exact room, 9 years old with engine grease still under his fingernails, and been weighed by 12 of the most powerful Force sensitives alive, and found conditionally acceptable. He knows what is coming: Mace Windu's measured skepticism, Yoda's precise probing, the formal procession of faces that will assess him the way a customs officer assesses a manifest. What he didn't account for was how different it would feel to walk in without fear. Not without care. He has a great deal of care. A careful man's attention to every variable in this room. But without the specific fear of a child who needed these people to say yes. He doesn't need them to say yes. He needs them to say yes correctly, for reasons they understand, so the yes holds when things become difficult later. Those are not the same thing. Mace Windu speaks first. "Qui-Gon, your report mentioned a child. Anakin Skywalker," Qui-Gon said. "Over 20,000 midi-chlorians per cell. The highest count on record. The room receives this information with the Jedi Council's characteristic absence of visible reaction, which is itself a kind of reaction." Anakin counts the micro-expressions, Ki-Adi-Mundi's brow tightening by 2 degrees, Adi Gallia's glance toward Mace, the single slow blink from Plo Koon that indicates recalibration. Yoda's eyes, already on him, don't change at all. "Step forward, young one," Mace said. Anakin steps forward. The testing is the same. An illuminated screen, a sequence of images, the correct answers supplied in the flat tone of a child being careful not to show off and failing anyway, because the accuracy is too consistent, the latency too short. He watches the council watch him, and gives them exactly what he gave them the first time. No more. Because the point is not to impress them. The point is to be legible to them, so that what he asks for afterward doesn't come from nowhere. Mace leans forward when it's over. "How do you feel, Anakin, being here, among so many strangers?" "Calm," Anakin said. A pause, small, precisely timed. "I was more nervous leaving my mother." Mace's expression shifts 1 degree toward something that isn't quite softness, but is the direction of it. Anakin has spent his adult life studying Mace Windu's face for tactical information. The degree shift is significant. "What do you know of the Jedi?" Ki-Adi-Mundi asked. "I know you're peacekeepers," Anakin said. "I know you serve something larger than yourselves. I know the Force runs through living things and that some people can feel it better than others." He meets Ki-Adi-Mundi's eyes directly. "I know that belonging to something like that isn't the same as being owned by it." A silence. Yoda makes a small sound. Not agreement, not disagreement. The sound he makes when a variable presents itself that he intends to examine more closely later. The deliberation happens without Anakin in the room. He waits in the antechamber with Obi-Wan, who stands near the window with his hands behind his back, and says nothing for a long time. Below them, Coruscant performs its endless commerce. A freight line crosses the mid-distance, running its slow arc between platforms. "They'll say he's too old," Obi-Wan said. Not to Anakin. To the window. "Maybe," Anakin said. "The code has an age, it exists for reasons. I know. Attachments formed before training are." Obi-Wan. The name stops him. The use of it, familiar, unadorned, with the weight of someone who has said this name 10,000 times, stops him the way the bow stopped him on the ship, a half-second interruption in the rhythm of his thinking. Anakin continues before the moment calcifies. "You're not arguing with me. You're deciding what you believe before they come back. so that you'll know where you stand. A beat. You do that. You make your position before the room asks for it, so the room can't make it for you. Obi-Wan turns from the window. The look on his face is one Anakin has never actually seen before, because it is the look of a 25-year-old Obi-Wan Kenobi being accurately seen by someone, possibly for the first time, and not knowing what to do with it. Not defensive, not closed. Just, still yes, Obi-Wan said. I do. It's a good instinct, Anakin said. I'm not criticizing it. Another silence, softer than the last one. What do you believe? Obi-Wan asked. About the code. About age. Anakin looks at him and thinks about the truth, which is enormous and impossible, and has no place in this antechamber between two people who have known each other for 4 days. He finds the edge of it that fits. I believe rules built from fear tend to fail exactly when you need them most, he said. And I believe the people in that room are wise enough to know the difference, if someone gives them room to. Obi-Wan is quiet for a long moment. Then, you're 9 years old. Yes, Anakin said. You speak like someone who has been disappointed a great many times. Yes, Anakin said. I have. Qui-Gon comes out of the chamber with the Council's answer, which is the same answer it was the first time. Not now. Too old. Too formed. The attachment to the mother a liability. The standard language of an institution protecting its own methodology. This is where it diverges. I want to say something, Anakin said. To the Council. Before we leave. Qui-Gon blinks. Anakin, please, something in the word. The stillness of it, the absence of desperation, makes Qui-Gon look at him for a long moment. Then he nods. The Council reconvenes because Qui-Gon asks, and because 12 of the Order's wisest members are, at their core, curious creatures. Anakin stands in the center of the circle again. I'm not asking you to train me, he said. I understand the concern. A boy my age, formed attachments, the risk of fear, the risk of loss. I understand all of it. He keeps his voice even, his gaze moving around the circle, meeting each pair of eyes for exactly a moment before moving on. I'm asking for something different. I'm asking that if you allow Qui-Gon to train me, Obi-Wan stays too. A beat of silence. Not as a second master, Anakin said. Not formally. Just, near, available. I think we need each other to become what we're supposed to be. All 3 of us. He pauses. I know that's a strange thing to ask. I know I haven't earned the right to ask it. I'm asking anyway, because no one else will. He looks at Yoda last. Yoda's eyes are very old and very still, and looking at him with the precise attention of someone who is reading beneath the words and finding the floor beneath the floor. Yoda said. The sound extends into silence. Strange, this request is not. The most honest one we have heard today, perhaps. Mace's jaw shifts by a fraction. Not disagreement. The expression of a man whose framework has just been asked to expand and is deciding whether to allow it. We will consider, Mace said finally. The 3 of you. Together. It is not yes. It is also not no. For now, it is enough. Naboo from the surface smells like rain that hasn't happened yet. The pressure in the air carries it, that particular atmospheric tension of a planet that produces weather the way a living thing breathes, constant and unhurried, the clouds building over the lake country in slow towers, while the capital sits in their shadow and waits. Theed is all pale stone and waterfalls and archways that curve like something grown rather than built, and the Trade Federation's occupation has left fingerprints on all of it, droids at the intersections, blast marks on 3 of the outer courtyard walls, a city holding itself very still the way people hold still when they don't want to be noticed. Anakin notices everything. He moves behind Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan through the palace's eastern corridor, small enough that the battle droids register him as non-threatening, which is the most useful thing about being 9 years old in a war zone. His job, officially, is to stay close and stay out of the way. His job, actually, is to remember what happens next and intervene at exactly the right moment without making it look like intervention. Qui-Gon's hand drops back briefly, A gesture, half signal, half reassurance. Stay close. Anakin stays close. The plan fractures in the throne room. Not catastrophically, not yet. But the Trade Federation's captain recalculates the hostage situation faster than he did in the original timeline. And what was supposed to be a clean extraction of the Queen becomes a standoff in the corridor outside the throne room, with 12 droidicas rolling into formation at the far end, and the Queen's Guard outnumbered at a ratio that makes the arithmetic unpleasant. Obi-Wan moves first. His lightsaber is in his hand before the lead droidica finishes deploying its shield, and the blue blade catches the corridor light and holds it, and he settles into the low Soresu guard that Anakin watched him hold 1,000 times in 1,000 bad situations, weight low, saber-centered. The posture that says, I intend to be here when this is over. He doesn't advance. He covers. Qui-Gon goes right, drawing 2 of the droidica's targeting systems toward himself, and the corridor fills with the high white noise of deflected bolts and the smell of scorched stone. Anakin is already moving left. He finds the junction box behind the third wall panel from the throne room entrance because he knows it's there. He spent 6 months after the Battle of Naboo studying the palace schematics with an obsessive's attention, while the Reconstruction Commission argued about which walls to preserve. And the junction box was the reason the Eastern Wing's power grid had been rerouted in the renovation. And the reason he knows this fact right now in a firefight is the kind of thing he has stopped finding strange. About living your life twice. He pries the panel with his fingers, finds the relay cluster, and crosses 2 contacts with a strip of conductive wire from his pocket. The droidicas at the far end of the corridor go dark simultaneously. Not all droids. The targeted power interruption is too surgical for that. Just the Eastern Corridor's deployment circuit. Just these 12. Just long enough. The shields drop. The weapons go silent. Obi-Wan is through the gap before the Trade Federation captain has finished registering that his formation has failed, and Qui-Gon is behind him, and the Queen's Guard moves, and the corridor is clear in 40 seconds. Obi-Wan looks back at Anakin. His expression runs through 3 states in rapid succession: relief, confusion. Something that is trying to be suspicion but keeps resolving into something warmer and less defensible. "How did you know that was there?" he said. "I looked," Anakin said. Obi-Wan stares at him for one long moment. Then he turns back to the corridor and moves. The hangar is the hard part. Maul arrives the way he always does, without announcement, in the way of things that have been waiting. And the psychic impact of him is something Anakin had not fully accounted for. Not fear. He is past fearing Maul, has been past it since the moment he understood, watching Obi-Wan fight across years of war, that Maul's days were already counted, that whatever came next for him had been written in the geometry of his own rage long before anyone put a blade to it. But the visual memory is visceral, the red and black geometry of that face, the double blade igniting with its particular resonant hum, the way he moves with the absolute physical confidence of something that has been built specifically to end Jedi. Qui-Gon steps forward. "Get to the ship," he said to Anakin, without looking back. "No," Anakin said. Qui-Gon does look back then, briefly, with the expression of a man who is not accustomed to being refused by anyone under the age of 30. "Anakin, I'm not going to fight him," Anakin said. "But I'm not leaving you." A half-second of assessment. Qui-Gon reads something in his face, not the words, but whatever is underneath the words, the absolute bedrock certainty that he will not move, and makes the tactical decision a general makes when a position is already established. He works with it. "Stay behind the ship's landing strut," Qui-Gon said. "Don't move until I tell you." Anakin moves behind the landing strut. He watches Qui-Gon engage Maul and thinks, not long enough. Not a long enough fight. Not in the original timeline. Qui-Gon was brilliant, and Maul was faster, and the geometry of the space had done the rest. The plasma doors had been the variable, the segmented corridor, the separated nights, the one long beat of stillness that ended everything. He is not going to let the plasma doors close. He finds the secondary control panel on the inner strut, and keeps his hand on it, and watches the fight. Qui-Gon is magnificent. It is a thing Anakin has always known intellectually, and has very rarely let himself simply watch. The Ataru form in full expression, leaping, kinetic. The saber moving in arcs that seem decorative, until you understand that every arc is a redirect, and every redirect is buying distance for the next leap. Maul presses. Maul is always pressing. His style has no patience in it, only acceleration, and Qui-Gon absorbs this the way a cliff absorbs weather, giving nothing, yielding nowhere. Obi-Wan engages from the left flank and Maul pivots to cover both of them, and for 30 seconds it is three beings moving through the hangar at the outer edge of what bodies can do, and the air smells like ozone and scorched permacrete. Then Maul finds the angle. It is the same angle. It will always be the same angle. Because it is structural, Qui-Gon's form opens on the left when he commits to a forward combination, and Maul's pattern recognition is surgical, and the pommel strike that follows is precise and brutal and drops Qui-Gon to his knees. Anakin hits the panel. The plasma doors stay open. Obi-Wan is there in 2 steps, not separated, not stranded, and the fight realigns around 2 Jedi instead of 1 and Maul's calculation changes. He recalibrates. He is not a being who panics, but he is a being who calculates, and the calculation has shifted. The repositioning gives Qui-Gon 4 seconds to recover. He uses 3 of them. Maul retreats. Not flight, Sith don't flee, and Maul's specific psychology doesn't contain the architecture for it, but a tactical withdrawal through the hangar's far exit. The double blade cycling back to idle, his eyes moving over the 3 of them, with the flat attention of something recalculating, rather than conceding. He looks at Anakin last. The look lasts 1 second. Anakin holds it, without moving. Maul's eyes are not warm or cold, they are functional, reading, the look of a predator categorizing something new. Then he has gone through the far door, and the hangar is loud with the sound of the Queen's Guard regrouping, and someone is calling a medical team for the 2 guards who caught deflected fire near the south wall. Qui-Gon straightens. He is breathing carefully, the careful breath of someone taking inventory of damage, and he looks at Anakin with an expression that has moved well past assessment and into something that has no formal Jedi vocabulary. "The doors," he said. "Yes," Anakin said. "You kept them open." "Yes." A long silence. Obi-Wan stands at Qui-Gon's shoulder, his saber back on his belt, looking at Anakin with the expression he has been wearing since the corridor, the unsatisfied framework expression, the look of a man whose categories keep failing to hold. "How long?" Obi-Wan said quietly. "Have you been doing that?" "Keeping people from dying in doorways, holding exits open with both hands, refusing to leave." "Long enough," Anakin said. Qui-Gon looks at him for another moment. Then he does something he has never done in any version of this memory. He reaches out and puts his hand on Anakin's shoulder. Not the guiding hand of a Jedi managing a civilian, but the hand of a man acknowledging an equal, deliberate, and sure. The bond forms then. Not with fanfare. Not with light or sound or any sensation that could be easily named. A thread, pulled taut between 3 people in a hangar that still smells like the fight, in a city slowly remembering how to breathe. It holds. The lake house on Naboo sits at the edge of water so still it doubles the sky. Not a grand residence. The Republic doesn't fund Jedi accommodations past functional, and functional on Naboo means stone floors and wide windows and the particular quiet of a place built before anyone decided quiet needed to be designed. The mountains in the distance are the color of old pewter in the late afternoon. A waterbird crosses the surface of the lake without disturbing it. The whole landscape operates at a frequency below urgency, and after the hangar, after Theed, after 3 weeks of the kind of alertness that lives in the back teeth, Anakin sits on the stone step outside the back door and lets the quiet happen to him. He is 9 years old, and he is 45 years old, and he is very, very tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes. The other kind, the kind that accumulates in layers over years, sedimented, geological, the weight of carrying a version of events that no one else can see or share or help with. He has been the only person in every room who knew what was coming for 6 weeks now, and the loneliness of that is something he hadn't budgeted for. He'd thought the mission would be enough to fill the space where the loneliness lived. He'd been wrong, in the way he was always wrong about things that required him to account for his own interior. The door opens behind him. Obi-Wan sits down on the step without asking whether it's wanted. He has a cup of something warm, the Naboo equivalent of tea, mildly bitter. The kind of thing Obi-Wan has been drawn to in every iteration of his life, as though he came pre-installed with the preference. He wraps both hands around it and looks at the lake. They sit in silence for a while. "You don't sleep enough," Obi-Wan said. "Eventually, I sleep fine. I hear you walking at night. I'm careful." "You're quiet," Obi-Wan said. "That's different from careful." A pause. "What are you thinking about when you walk?" Anakin considers the honest answer, which is, everything that hasn't happened yet, and everything I'm trying to prevent, and a woman I love who isn't born yet, and a man I became who I am never becoming again. He considers it and sets it aside and finds the edge of the truth that fits in a conversation between a 9-year-old and a 25-year-old on a step above a lake. "Things I can't change," he said, "and things I can." Obi-Wan turns his cup slowly in his hands. "How do you separate them?" "Badly," Anakin said. "Most of the time." Something in Obi-Wan's expression loosens by 1 degree. It is not a smile, not quite, but it is the expression that lives in the same neighborhood as a smile, the one that means I recognize this, I didn't expect to recognize this in you. He looks back at the lake. "The council sent their confirmation this morning," he said. "The arrangement stands. Qui-Gon will train you formally. I remain." "Adjacent. Adjacent," Anakin repeated. "Their word. Do you mind it?" Obi-Wan is quiet for a moment that has some work happening inside it. "I minded it for about an hour yesterday," he said, with a precision that is itself a kind of honesty. "Then I decided minding it was less interesting than figuring out what it actually means." Anakin looks at him. "What does it actually mean?" "I have no idea," Obi-Wan said. "I thought you might." Qui-Gon finds them there 20 minutes later, lowering himself onto the step above with the ease of a large man who has made peace with the physical requirements of the world, setting his own cup down on the stone beside him. The three of them occupy the steps in a descending line, Qui-Gon at the top, Obi-Wan in the middle, Anakin at the bottom. And the arrangement is so precisely what it will become, what it has always been trying to become, that Anakin has to look at the lake and hold very still for a moment. "The Queen's Reconstruction Committee meets tomorrow," Qui-Gon said. "We'll be there for the initial session, then free for the afternoon." A pause. "I thought we might use it." "For what?" Obi-Wan asked. "Training. The three of us." He says it the way he says most things, with the ease of a man who has already decided and is now informing the room. "The council's arrangement is formal. What we build here doesn't have to be." Obi-Wan turns his cup in his hands again. The gesture Anakin will spend the next decade learning to read as the outward sign of active internal processing. "You're proposing an informal structure alongside the formal one. I'm proposing we stop pretending the formal structure is the only one doing anything useful," Qui-Gon said. A pause. "Yes," Obi-Wan said. "Just that." They train in the meadow behind the lake house the following afternoon, and it is nothing like training is supposed to look. Qui-Gon's approach to instruction has never been architectural. He doesn't build from the ground up. He doesn't run drills. He doesn't correct stance with the methodical patience of the temple's senior instructors. He finds the current in a situation and lets it carry things forward, which frustrates Obi-Wan enormously and produces results anyway, which frustrates Obi-Wan more. What he does with Anakin is this. He ignites his saber and attacks. Not dangerously, not with the specific intent to harm a child, but with enough genuine commitment that the Force response is real rather than performed, and Anakin's body, 9 years old slight, with the muscle memory of a pilot rather than a duelist, has to reach for something deeper than technique to compensate. He reaches. The Force rises in him the way it always does, which is immediately and with no throttle a river without a dam, and he deflects 3 strikes that should not be deflectable by someone his size and experience, and on the 4th he pivots rather than blocks, and finds the angle that opens because he has fought Qui-Gon twice in the old timeline, and once was enough to understand the form. Qui-Gon stops. Obi-Wan, watching from the tree line with his arms crossed, has gone very still. Where did that come from? Qui-Gon asked. The Force, Anakin said. Specifically, I saw the opening. He pauses. Your fourth combination leaves the right side if you commit to the third. The silence that follows has a particular quality. Qui-Gon looks at Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan looks at Anakin. Anakin looks at the ground, because he has overcorrected, showed too much. The old problem, the perennial problem, the thing that never changed across any version of himself, and he is deciding how much of it to walk back. Show me, Obi-Wan said. Not to Qui-Gon, to Anakin. He steps out of the tree line and takes the saber from his belt and ignites it, and his posture shifts into the Soresu guard. And he looks at Anakin with the focused, uncomplicated attention of a man who has decided that the fastest route to understanding something is direct experience. Anakin raises the training saber. What happens next is not a spar. Spars have structure, rounds, pauses, the pedagogical architecture of demonstration and correction. What happens in the meadow behind the lake house on a Naboo afternoon has none of that. It is two people moving together and against each other and with each other in a way that has no name yet, discovering through motion what the relationship between them is actually made of. Obi-Wan is better. Technically, formally, in every measurable dimension of lightsaber discipline, he is better. His Soresu is already exceptional. The form not yet fully mature but structurally complete. A defense so efficient it borders on frustrating to fight. He absorbs everything Anakin brings without retreating, redirecting rather than blocking, letting Anakin's reach and instinct expend themselves against angles that aren't where they appeared to be. And Anakin learns. Not what he expected to learn. He expected to know everything already, to be able to read Obi-Wan's form the way he eventually learned to read it. But this Obi-Wan is 25 and building something Vader only ever fought against, never alongside. And alongside is completely different. He is learning the shape of Obi-Wan's mind the way you learn a landscape, not from a map, but from walking it. They stop when the light changes. Neither of them called it. They simply stopped at the same moment, breathing, standing 3 feet apart in the long amber light of Naboo's late afternoon, and Obi-Wan looks at him with an expression that has no suspicion left in it. Not trust, yet not completely, but the thing that comes just before trust. The moment when the question mark softens into something that isn't yet an answer but is no longer a challenge. Qui-Gon sits against a tree at the meadow's edge, watching them with the quiet satisfaction of a man who set something in motion and is observing the result. Same time tomorrow? Obi-Wan said. Yes, Anakin said. The waterbird crosses the lake again in the distance, or a different waterbird, impossible to tell from here. The mountains have gone from pewter to dark, and the first stars are finding themselves above the tree line, and the three of them walk back to the lake house together without needing to discuss it. Not a family yet. Not a team yet, in the formal sense. Something without a category, which is sometimes the truest kind of thing. Palpatine's office smells like old wood and ambition. Not metaphorically. The Chancellor keeps actual carved wood paneling on the walls of his private reception room, imported from somewhere that no longer has trees to import from, and the smell of it is rich and specific and ancient in a way that nothing on Coruscant naturally is. It is a deliberate choice. Everything in this room is a deliberate choice. The lighting angled to warm rather than illuminate, the chairs positioned so that visitors feel received rather than interviewed, the view of the Senate dome through the wide window conveying the sense that power and benevolence occupy the same address. Anakin knows all of this because he spent 11 years in this room, or rooms like it, being gradually and expertly taken apart. He sits in the chair across from Palpatine and keeps his face open and his thoughts still, and lets the man work. Palpatine is past 60 and looks 50, the specific vitality of someone who has access to resources that offset the ordinary costs of time. His smile, when Anakin enters, is the smile of a man reuniting with something he's been looking forward to. Warm, specific, arriving a half-second early the way genuine pleasure does. It is a perfect performance. Anakin has the advantage of knowing it is a performance, which is the only advantage that matters in this room. Anakin, Palpatine said. How wonderful. Please, sit. He gestures with both hands in the particular way that makes the gesture feel like a gift rather than a direction. I've heard remarkable things about you from the Jedi. and from the Queen herself. She speaks very highly of your bravery on Naboo. The Queen is generous, Anakin said. She's accurate. Palpatine settles back in his chair with the ease of a man who has never needed to manage how he occupies space. How are you finding Coruscant? It must be overwhelming after Tatooine. Different, Anakin said. I'm adjusting. Of course you are. The warmth in it is calibrated exactly right, not patronizing, not excessive. The precise temperature of someone who believes in you slightly more than the evidence yet warrants. You strike me as someone who adjusts well. Qui-Gon speaks of your instincts with genuine admiration, and Qui-Gon is not a man given to admiration lightly. Anakin smiles. The smile is real, technically, in the way that a mask is real. It exists. It functions. It conceals what's behind it. He's been generous too, Anakin said. The first meeting lasts 40 minutes. Palpatine covers Anakin's childhood, the pod race, his impressions of the Jedi Temple, his feelings about leaving Tatooine, his relationship with Qui-Gon, his first impressions of Coruscant's scale and complexity. He asks questions that feel like interest and function like cartography, building a map of what Anakin values, what he fears, where the edges of his loyalty are and whether they have any give in them. Anakin answers all of it. He answers warmly, openly, with the specific texture of a boy who is grateful to be heard by someone important. He gives Palpatine the surface he is looking for and nothing below it, and the discipline required to do this, to be present and responsive without being legible, to perform openness while remaining entirely closed, is the most demanding thing he has done since waking up in Shmi's house, harder than the pod race and harder than the hangar and harder than standing in the council chamber without flinching. He learned this discipline from Vader. Vader learned it from Palpatine. There is something almost funny about that, in the way that only very dark things are funny. At the 20-minute mark, Palpatine begins the part of the conversation that isn't a conversation. The Jedi, he says with a particular gentleness, are remarkable people. Devoted, disciplined, I have enormous respect for the Order. A brief pause that does specific work, creating the space for A but without saying one. I sometimes wonder, though, whether their traditions leave room for everything a young man might need. A sense of belonging, of family. His eyes find Anakin's with precise warmth. You had that on Tatooine. With your mother. That kind of love, it doesn't simply stop being important because one enters a new life. Anakin looks at him. He lets the silence sit for a beat, not the silence of being affected, but the silence of someone taking the statement seriously, which is what Palpatine expects. And then he says, the Jedi have been very clear that my relationship with my mother is something to work through carefully, not suppress. Qui-Gon has been especially thoughtful about it. A flicker, barely visible. The micro-recalibration of a man whose instrument has returned unexpected data. Of course, Palpatine said smoothly, Qui-Gon is an exceptional man. Somewhat unorthodox, which I mean as a compliment. The smile again, warm and conspiratorial, the smile that says between us. I only meant that the temple, for all its wisdom, can sometimes feel impersonal. Institutional, I hope you know that my door is always open to you, Anakin, not as Chancellor. As a friend. That's very kind, Anakin said. I'll tell Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon you said so. The flicker again. Slightly larger this time. Yes, Palpatine said. Please do. He delivers the debrief that evening in the common room of the Jedi quarters, sitting across from Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, with a cup of the Naboo tea he has developed a genuine fondness for despite himself, and he goes through it with the flat precision of a field report. The wood paneling, the chair positioning, the lighting, the exact sequence of topics and the order they were raised in. The specific phrases Palpatine used, a sense of belonging, of family. My door is always open, not as Chancellor, as a friend. The micro-recalibrations he observed. The question that wasn't a question about the Jedi's emotional limitations. Obi-Wan listens without interrupting, which is not his natural mode. When Anakin finishes, he is quiet for a moment, with the look of someone building something in their mind. He raised attachment in the first meeting, Obi-Wan said, not a question. Indirectly, 22 minutes in. That's fast. A pause. That's very fast. Something in his voice has gone careful and precise, the way it does when he is naming something he wants named correctly. He's testing how Qui-Gon has framed the code's position on attachment, whether there's a gap there he can use. Yes, Anakin said, and the offer of personal friendship separate from his institutional role. Establishing a relationship with different rules than the official one, Anakin said. Private access. Confidences that don't go through the order. Obi-Wan looks at Qui-Gon. Something passes between them, not spoken, not needing to be. Grooming, Obi-Wan said. The word is flat and clinical and precise, and sits in the room with considerable weight. This is a grooming pattern. Qui-Gon's expression, which has been still throughout, shifts by 1 degree into something that isn't anger, but is the temperature below anger. The cold clarity of a man whose instincts have been running a background calculation and have just returned a result. "You'll go back," he said to Anakin. Not a question. He expects me to, Anakin said. If I stop attending, he recalibrates toward a harder approach. If I attend, we see the pattern build. We document it, Obi-Wan said. Specific phrases, specific topics, the sequence and timing. Cross-referenced, Anakin said, against what he says publicly, where the private version diverges from the public one. Obi-Wan nods once. What did he feel like, he said carefully, in the Force? Anakin considers this. It is the question that requires the most careful answer, because, the true answer, he felt like standing next to a sun that produces no warmth, like a drain behind pleasant wallpaper. Like the specific absence of something that should be there, is the kind of answer that raises questions he cannot answer yet. Still, Anakin said. Completely, deliberately still, like a room where someone has removed everything that makes noise. Obi-Wan is quiet for a long moment. That's not what people feel like, he said. No, Anakin said. It isn't. Palpatine sits alone after the boy leaves. He remains in his chair for a long moment with his hands folded and his expression neutral, which is his default state when no performance is required. He reviews the meeting with the unhurried precision of someone who has been doing this for a very long time, and is rarely surprised by results. The boy is warm, responsive, grateful, in the texture of his responses. For the attention of an important man, that much tracks. He is also, beneath all of that, unusually composed for someone his age, and the composure has a quality Palpatine cannot immediately categorize. Not the composure of the damaged, which has a particular brittle texture, not the composure of the naturally detached, which is a different kind of stillness, something older. The relationship with the Jedi, specifically the relationship with Qui-Gon and the young Padawan, is tighter than it should be at this stage, warmer, more established. The boy had mentioned them both without prompting, at a moment specifically designed to encourage a different kind of confidence. Palpatine notes this. He adjusts the timeline in his mind by a small, precise increment. The game is long. It has always been long. One well-adjusted boy, however unusual, is not a variable that changes the fundamental architecture of what is coming. He is simply a variable that will require more patience than most. 10 years pass the way wars pass, not gradually, but in layers. The first layer is the work. Missions along the outer rim, trade dispute mediations that turn into something more complicated halfway through, 3 separate assignments that begin as escort operations and end as something requiring a different vocabulary. Anakin grows into his height slowly, then quickly, the way adolescence always works. And then he is 19 and Obi-Wan is 35, and Qui-Gon is somewhere past 60, and wearing it the way good wood wears weather, deeper grained, more himself, no softer. The second layer is the bond. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with ceremony. It builds the way the lake house meadow built between them, through repetition, through the specific weight of shared danger, through years of the Force doing the quiet work bridges do, not dramatic, just present. Just holding. By the time Anakin is 15, he can feel Obi-Wan's focus sharpening 3 rooms away when something requires it. By 17, Obi-Wan finishes his tactical assessments half a beat faster, because something at the edge of his awareness is already running the geometry. Neither of them discusses it directly. Both of them rely on it absolutely. The third layer is Palpatine. The sparring room at the temple's east wing is empty at this hour, except for the two of them. And Anakin moves through the Gemso sequence at three-quarter speed, while Obi-Wan watches with the stillness of someone who is not watching the sequence, but watching what's underneath it. "You're holding the left shoulder high again," Obi-Wan said. "I know. It'll open you on the draw." "I know." Anakin drops through the transition and corrects the shoulder and continues. "It's a habit from the field. When I favor the left, I can feel more of the bond." Obi-Wan is quiet for a moment. "The bond runs through your offhand?" "It runs everywhere, but it's stronger on the left." He finishes the sequence and lowers the saber. "Where does it run for you?" "The back of the neck," Obi-Wan said, after a moment. "When you're alarmed. Before you know you're alarmed." Anakin looks at him. "That's useful. It's occasionally inconvenient," Obi-Wan said, and the dry precision of it makes Anakin smile despite himself, the specific smile that Obi-Wan produces in him and no one else, something involuntary and uncomplicated. Qui-Gon enters then, without preamble, which is how he enters most rooms, and he is carrying the kind of stillness that means he has been thinking for a long time and has arrived at the end of the thought. "Sit down," he said. "Both of you." The financial trail begins with a shipping manifest. Qui-Gon spreads 3 data pads on the floor between them, the gesture of someone who thinks spatially, who needs to see the architecture of a problem before he can navigate it. The manifests are Outer Rim cargo routes, Techno-Union subsidiaries, banking irregularities flagged by a Treasury audit that went quiet 4 months after it was commissioned and hasn't been mentioned since. "Dooku," Qui-Gon said. "The shell companies trace to his foundation on Sereno. But the Foundation's investment portfolio connects to 17 separatist supplier chains that don't exist yet. They're structured in advance of a conflict that hasn't started. Pre-positioned," Obi-Wan said. "For a war that's being prepared before there's a war to prepare for." Qui-Gon's finger moves across one of the manifests. "These shipping lanes exist for one purpose: rapid military deployment. They're not trade routes. They've never carried trade. Someone is building the infrastructure of a conflict and hiding it inside the legitimate economy." Anakin looks at the manifests and feels the knowledge settle into its place, the confirmation of something he has been carrying for 10 years, finally becoming visible to other people, finally becoming real in the shared world rather than only in his own. "Where does the money originate?" he asks. "That's the question." Qui-Gon sits back. "The Foundation on Sereno is a layer. The layer beneath it is a munalanced banking collective. The layer beneath that is a trust instrument so old and so structured that it predates the current Republic Charter." "Centuries old," Obi-Wan said quietly. "Older." A pause. "Someone has been building this for a very long time. Camino is a planet that doesn't want to be found. It exists in a gap in the archive records, the kind of gap that reads as natural unless you're looking for something specific. Unless you know that a gap in a star chart at these coordinates should be a different kind of gap. Anakin knows what to look for because he spent 3 months after the Battle of Geonosis reading the investigation reports that came too late, the ones that reconstructed what should have been visible years earlier. The planet is all water and rain, which is not a metaphor but is structurally accurate to how it feels to arrive there. Gray above, gray below. The landing platform rising out of an ocean that extends to every horizon. The Kaminoans receive them with the precise courtesy of people accustomed to official visits and unaccustomed to unexpected ones. Tonwi leads them through corridors that are all white curves and biological efficiency, and her manner is gracious in the specific way of someone who has already decided to be cooperative and is waiting for the visitors to ask the right question. Obi-Wan asks it. "We'd like to see the facilities." "Of course," Tonwi said. "The production is ahead of schedule. We are very proud of the progress. The production floor is immense. Not metaphorically, not in the way that large things impress, immense in the way that changes the scale of everything you thought you understood about what was being planned. Hundreds of thousands of clones in various stages of development. The growth acceleration visible in the tiered platforms below them. An army being built with the patience and resource of something that has always intended to win. Obi-Wan stands at the railing and his face is very still. Qui-Gon stands beside him and looks at the scale of it with the expression of a man arriving at the final proof of a theorem he wished he'd been wrong about. Anakin looks at the clones and thinks about Order 66. The growth process, he said to Tanwi. What enhancements are built into the physiology? Accelerated maturation, as you can see. Superior bone density and muscle tissue. Cognitive conditioning for combat effectiveness. She tilts her head. And the behavioral modification implants, of course. The word implants lands in the room's air. Could you explain those? Obi-Wan said. His voice is neutral in the precise way it goes neutral when he is controlling something that is not neutral. Standard protocol for an army of this scale, Tanwi said. The implants allow for post-deployment behavioral modification if required. Command override capacity. It was a client specification. Which client? Qui-Gon said. The original commission. She pauses. A Jedi Master. The Order has been on record for 10 years. They don't speak until they are back on the ship and in hyperspace. The silence has a specific texture. Not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who need a moment before they can say it usefully. The stars outside the cockpit streak white and hold. Obi-Wan speaks first. The implants are kill switches, he said. Behavioral override. Command specification. The client didn't build a Republic army. They built a weapon with a Jedi-shaped trigger. Order 66, Anakin said. The words exist in the room. He has been carrying them for 10 years, and now they are in the shared air. Visible, real. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon both look at him. He meets the look steadily. I don't know what the order is called. I know what it does. When the command is given, the implants activate, and the clones kill every Jedi they can reach. A pause. Every one. The silence that follows is not shock. Exactly. It is the silence of two people whose framework has just been asked to hold something very large and is deciding whether it can. You've known, Qui-Gon said. Not an accusation. The careful voice of a man confirming a coordinate. Not the proof, Anakin said. The shape. How long? He looks at the hyperspace tunnel and thinks about a throne room. A fire. A boy who refused to look away. A long time, he said. Qui-Gon nods once, slowly, with the gravity of a man incorporating a difficult thing and continuing to function. The Council needs the evidence. All of it. Not a theory, the manifests, the Camino facility, the implant specifications. He looks at Obi-Wan. Mace will want to verify independently before he moves. Mace will want to verify 3 times. Obi-Wan said. Then we give him something worth verifying 3 times. Anakin looks at the two of them, at the deliberate, unhurried competence of 2 men who have just discovered that someone has been building the architecture of their destruction for decades and have responded by immediately discussing documentation standards, and the knowledge sits in his chest like a stone, but differently than it used to. Not alone. For the first time in 10 years. In 2 lifetimes. Not alone. Palpatine stands at the window of his private office and watches Coruscant perform its ordinary evening. The transit lanes pulse their slow rhythms, cargo haulers and airspeeders moving in the automated patience of a system that has been running long enough to run itself. The Senate Dome catches the last light at this hour and holds it, gold against the darkening sky, the building that contains the Republic's voice going quiet for the night, while the Republic's actual machinery continues underneath it in the dark. He has watched this view for 21 years. He knows the way the light changes by season, by weather, by the specific angle of Coruscant's axial tilt at different points in the year. He finds it, tonight, insufficiently calming. The hologram of Dooku is blue-white and precise, the transmission quality excellent because Dooku has always had good taste in equipment. The investigation has reached Camino, Dooku said. Not a question. Apparently, Palpatine moves away from the window. He does not sit. Sitting suggests a conversation of equals, and this is not that, even when it presents as that. The Kaminoans were cooperative. They're always cooperative, Dooku said, with whoever is asking. Which is why the facility was always a point of exposure. Palpatine's voice is level. I accepted the risk because the production timeline required the facility, and the facility required the Kaminoans, and the Kaminoans require a certain kind of management that doesn't include secrets. A pause. What I did not accept was this timeline. Dooku is quiet for a moment. The transmission hum fills the space. They have the implant specifications, Dooku said. They have the implant specifications. Then the clone army is no longer a surprise. The clone army, Palpatine said, was never the point. It was a delivery mechanism. The point was the order. He stands at the edge of the desk and looks at the surface of it. The careful arrangement of objects, each one chosen, each one in its place. Without the order landing cleanly, without the Jedi distributed and isolated across a dozen theaters, the clones are simply soldiers. Useful soldiers. Insufficient ones. His hand moves across the desk surface, not touching anything. The long plan required 3 things in sequence: the war to scatter the Jedi, the order to destroy them, the surviving chaos to justify emergency power. We are 4 years from that sequence beginning. He looks up. We were 4 years from that sequence beginning. He replays the variable from the beginning, which is what he does when a plan requires revision, not from the point of failure, but from the origin, finding the root. Anakin Skywalker, 9 years old on Tatooine, a midi-chlorian count that represented the highest concentration of Force potential in recorded galactic history, and a psychological profile that should have made him the perfect instrument. The childhood trauma was preloaded: slavery, powerlessness, the specific wound of a mother left behind. The anger was native. The attachment was already formed and already dangerous, which meant it only needed to be redirected rather than manufactured. And then something had gone wrong. Not obviously. Not in any moment he could point to. But across 21 years of careful cultivation, the boy had remained. Warm, certainly, responsive, apparently open, and never, not once, said anything that created distance between himself and the Jedi. Not a doubt about the Council. Not a resentment about the Code. Not a single unguarded moment in which the thing Palpatine was cultivating had shown itself. He had assumed patience would resolve it. He had been wrong. The Jedi around Skywalker were the variable he had underweighted. Qui-Gon surviving Naboo, that had been the first deviation, and he had adjusted for it. A living Qui-Gon was an institutional irritant, a reformist voice, ultimately manageable. What he hadn't accounted for was Qui-Gon's specific effect on Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Kenobi's specific effect on the boy, and the effect of the 3 of them operating as a unit with the kind of trust that his usual instruments, isolation, doubt, the careful wedge of manufactured grievance, couldn't find purchase in. You cannot isolate someone who doesn't feel alone. He had spent 21 years trying. The conversation with Dooku ends with instructions that are precise and carry no warmth, because warmth between them has always been instrumental rather than real, and the instrument has reached the end of its usefulness for that register. Accelerate the separatist mobilization, Palpatine said. I want the outer systems in declared opposition within 8 months. We move to direct action before the Council can bring what they have to the Senate floor. The mobilization without the war narrative will look like what it is, Dooku said. Then we provide the narrative quickly. A pause. The assassination attempt on the senator from Naboo. Move that forward. 3 weeks. Amidala. She's been a vocal opponent of the Military Creation Act. An attempt on her life creates the emergency context we need without requiring the full legislative battle. He moves back toward the window. The transit lanes are still running their patient loops below. And if the Jedi protect her, as they will, it keeps them occupied while we complete the mobilization. Dooku nods. Once, and the hologram ends. Palpatine stands in the silence of his office and runs the revised sequence from beginning to end, finding the weaknesses, finding the load-bearing points. The clone army is compromised as a secret, but not as a weapon. The Jedi knowing about the inhibitor chips doesn't remove the chips. It creates a different problem. The Council will move to extract the chips, which takes time and resources. And time and resources spent on that are time and resources not spent preparing for what comes next. The exposure is a delay, not a defeat. The Skywalker problem is more fundamental. He looks at this honestly, which is one of his genuine disciplines, the refusal to dress an uncomfortable truth in better clothes than it deserves. The boy is not reachable through the channels he had prepared. The bond with Kenobi and Jinn is structural, not circumstantial. It can't be undermined from outside because it has been built through shared experience with sufficient depth that no external voice carries equivalent weight. Which means the approach must change. Not subtlety. Not patience. The patient game has produced 21 years of a target who has remained precisely himself while appearing to cooperate. The patient game is over. The declaration goes out at the 9th hour of the Coruscant evening. Not through Palpatine's office directly, through a Senate security channel, then a loyal Bureau of Intelligence relay. Then a public broadcast that hits the holonet in 43 languages simultaneously. The content is precise, evidence, fabricated with the quality that only decades of careful preparation allow, that a Jedi-led conspiracy has been operating within the Senate itself. Encrypted communications between senior council members and separatist financial networks. A doctored recording of Mace Windu meeting with a known separatist intermediary. Testimony from 3 senators who have owed Palpatine favors for so long they've forgotten the debt is owed. The declaration is not a clumsy thing. It is the work of someone who has spent decades learning exactly how much evidence reasonable people require before they believe what they desperately don't want to believe, and providing exactly that amount, with the specific texture that makes it feel discovered rather than manufactured. The temple's communication channels register the broadcast 40 seconds after it goes live. Somewhere in the residential wing, an alert goes to 3 Jedi, a knight, a senior Padawan, and a master who has been expecting something like this for 4 years, and the night changes its quality entirely. In the Senate corridors, the first sirens begin. In the transit lanes below his window, Palpatine watches a security transport redirect toward the Temple District, and then another, and then 4 more, and the familiar pattern of an emergency response system activating, and he feels. Not pleasure exactly. Pleasure is too warm a word for what he feels, but the deep, cold satisfaction of a mechanism engaging as designed. Late, behind schedule, missing 3 variables he had intended to control, but moving. The Republic's voice goes quiet for the night, while the Republic's actual machinery continues underneath it in the dark. And now, the dark is full of something that has been waiting a very long time to stop pretending. The temple is loud in a way it has never been. Not combat loud yet, not the specific register of ignited sabers and structural damage and the sounds a building makes when it is being asked to absorb things it wasn't built for. Something earlier than that. The alarm system running its low, insistent tone through every corridor, the sound of doors sealing in sequence. The organized movement of Jedi through hallways that usually move at the unhurried pace of people who have somewhere to be and enough time to get there. Now they move fast, and the fast has a quality to it. Controlled, not panicked, but underneath the control something that recognizes what this moment is. Anakin moves through the East Corridor at a pace that isn't running but covers ground like running does, and the bond hums at the back of his neck with Obi-Wan's focus, sharp, already tactical, already 3 problems ahead, and he follows the thread of it toward the inner courtyard the way he has followed it 100 times, in 100 bad situations. Obi-Wan is already there. The broadcast has reached the outer districts, Obi-Wan said, without preamble, his eyes on the entrance to the courtyard's south gate. Senate Guard has 3 transports in the Temple District. They're not deploying yet. They're waiting for something. A second broadcast, Anakin said. An escalation. Palpatine won't send them in on the first declaration. He needs another news cycle before he can justify a physical approach. How long? An hour. Maybe 2. Obi-Wan nods once. Qui-Gon is with the council. They're moving the younglings to the lower levels. He finally looks at Anakin, and the look is the one Anakin knows best. The look that does its assessment in half a second, and then moves to work. We need to end this before the transports move. Not contain it. End it. Palpatine, Anakin said. Palpatine. They find Qui-Gon at the council chamber door, and the 3 of them stand in the corridor, with the alarm still running its low, insistent note through the walls, and Qui-Gon listens to the plan with his arms at his sides and his face doing the thing it does, when he has already arrived at the same conclusion, and is confirming the route. "The Council wants to wait," he said. "Gather more Jedi, secure the temple, negotiate with the Senate. The Senate is broadcasting fabricated evidence," Obi-Wan said. "Negotiating with the Senate buys Palpatine time to manufacture more of it. I know. If we wait for him to finish shaping the public narrative—" "I know, Obi-Wan." Qui-Gon's voice is patient and final. "I told them the same thing." Mace disagreed. "Then, Mace is wrong," Anakin said. Both of them look at him. He doesn't adjust the statement. "Palpatine has been operating on patience for 30 years. Every hour we spend in a defensive position is an hour he uses to build the next layer. The only thing that stops this is removing him from the board tonight, before the second broadcast, before the transports move." He meets Qui-Gon's eyes. "You know that." A long moment. "Yes," Qui-Gon said. "I do." He steps aside from the door. "The Council's authority is theirs. What you do as Jedi in the field is a different matter. The specific, deliberate look of a man drawing a line he intends to be visible. Be careful." "We will," Obi-Wan said. "I was talking to both of you. The Chancellor's office is 3 kilometers from the temple through transit lanes that are starting to show the shape of what's coming. More security transports than usual. The civilian traffic thinning at the edges as automated systems begin rerouting around elevated alert zones. Anakin and Obi-Wan move through the lower pedestrian levels, below the transit lanes, and the bond runs between them like a current that has stopped being something they manage and has become simply the way they think. No plan survives contact, Anakin knows, but the plan is simple enough that its core survives. Reach Palpatine before the second broadcast, before the transports move, before the fabricated narrative becomes the only one the Senate has heard. "He'll know we're coming," Obi-Wan said. Not worried. Stating a variable. Yes, he'll have prepared for it. He's been preparing for something like this for 30 years. A pause. "So have I." Obi-Wan looks at him briefly as they move. The look that goes beneath the surface of what is said, and reads something underneath. He doesn't ask. He has learned, across 10 years, when to ask, and when to trust that the answer will arrive when it's useful. "Left shoulder," he said instead. Anakin corrects it without breaking stride. The outer office is empty. Not defensively empty, not the emptiness of a space that has been cleared and armed. Just absent. The staff dismissed early. The desks neat. The lighting on its evening setting. Someone expected not to need the appearance of ordinary business tonight. The inner door is unlocked. Palpatine is seated at his desk. He is in the dark, or nearly, a single lamp on the desk's surface, angled upward, casting the shadows of his face in the specific geometry that Anakin knows, that he has carried in his memory for 40 years. That appears in the part of his mind that stores things which left marks. The grandfatherly warmth is gone. The smile is gone. What remains is the face underneath those things, which is old in a way that has nothing to do with age, and patient in a way that has nothing to do with virtue, and looking at the two of them with the flat attention of a being who has been waiting to stop pretending for a very long time. "I wondered," Palpatine said, "which of you would come." "Both of us," Obi-Wan said. A pause. Something moves across Palpatine's face, not surprise, not quite, but the fractional adjustment of a calculation revising itself. "Yes," he said. "I see that." His eyes moved to Anakin. "I had hoped, Anakin, for more time, for a different conversation." The warmth attempts to return and finds no purchase. He abandons it mid-gesture, smoothly, the way a skilled performer abandons a line that isn't landing. "You were always going to be extraordinary." "I know," Anakin said. "You were going to use that." "Yes, no apology in it. Shall we begin?" The lightsaber comes from his sleeve. Not a sleeve compartment, from inside the sleeve itself, a retraction mechanism built into the garment. Because Palpatine has always understood that the weapon you see coming is the weapon you can prepare for. The crimson blade fills the office in red light, and he moves. And the thing about Palpatine in motion is that all the slowness, all the gravity and deliberate patience of his public self is entirely absent. He is fast in the specific way of something that has had decades to refine speed to its essential minimum. Obi-Wan's blade is up before the thought of it. The office is too small for this. Furniture and desk and the geometry of a room built for conversation, not for three beings moving at the edge of what the Force allows. Palpatine accounts for all of it, and uses all of it. Redirecting off the desk's edge, using the lamp as a distraction, taking the angles the architecture provides with the ease of someone who measured this room before Anakin was born. He is magnificent and terrible and fighting with everything he has. It is not enough. Not because Anakin or Obi-Wan is individually his superior. Neither of them is quite, not yet. Palpatine's blade work is decades refined, his Force command is immense, his combat intelligence is the most sophisticated thing Anakin has ever fought against. But he has never fought two people who share a bond. He finds the gap between them, and it closes before he reaches it. He constructs a sequence that should separate them, and they are already compensating before the sequence executes. Not because either of them saw it coming, but because each of them can feel the shape of the other's attention, and the shape doesn't leave the gap open. He tries the psychological instruments, the tone of voice he uses to manufacture doubt, the specific words he calibrated across 21 years to find the space between Anakin and the Jedi around him. He held you back, Palpatine said to Anakin, pressing Obi-Wan's guard. Kept you small, gave you a cage with a longer chain and called it family. No, Anakin said. One word. Flat, certain, without heat. The way you say something that simply doesn't require argument because it isn't true, and you know it isn't true in the part of yourself that can't be reached by someone else's voice. Obi-Wan's blade finds the angle on the left. Palpatine moves to cover it. Anakin is already on the right. The finishing strike is not dramatic. It is the most undramatic moment in the room. A coordinated press. Obi-Wan's Ceresu holding the center while Anakin's Gemso drives forward on the open side. A single unified movement that has no seam between them, because there is no seam between them, hasn't been for years. And Palpatine's guard collapses not because it was broken, but because it was designed to fight one person, and there is. Only one person here, with two bodies and one mind between them. The red blade goes dark. Palpatine falls back against the desk and does not rise. The office is quiet. The lamp on the desk is still on, still angled upward, and in its light Obi-Wan and Anakin stand on either side of what remains of 30 years of careful architecture, the longest patience in the galaxy. Dismantled in a room built for conversation, by two people who refuse to stop trusting each other. Obi-Wan's breathing steadies. Outside, the sirens are still running. The broadcast, he said. Qui-Gon will have reached Mace by now, Anakin said. With Palpatine gone, the fabricated evidence has no one behind it. It collapses under a real investigation. That takes time. Yes, a pause. We have time now. Obi-Wan looks at him across the dark office, across the lamp's upward light, across 10 years and 2 lifetimes and everything that has been built between them, and says nothing for a moment because some things are more accurately expressed as silence. Then, left shoulder. Anakin looks down. The shoulder is high again. He lowers it. Old habit, he said. We'll fix it, Obi-Wan said. They walk out of the Chancellor's office into a Coruscant night that is already, somewhere in its vast and humming machinery, beginning to change. Sirens still running, but running differently now. The sound of a system trying to understand what has just shifted beneath it. The bond settles. The work begins. The Senate chamber takes 3 days to stop arguing. This is, by historical standards, remarkably fast. The fabricated evidence collapses under a real investigation the way fabricated things always collapse, when the person maintaining them is no longer in the room, quickly, and then completely, each layer exposing the layer beneath it until the architecture is visible for what it always was. The senators who provided testimony recant in the specific sequence of people who have realized the favor they owed has become more expensive than the debt. The doctored recordings fail spectral analysis. The encrypted communications traced to servers that didn't exist until 4 days before the broadcast. Mace Windu presents the findings to a full Senate session on the 4th day. Standing at the central podium, with the flat, unhurried delivery of a man who has been correct about something he wished he'd been wrong about. And the Senate chamber receives it in the way large bodies receive difficult truths, noisily, then quietly, then with the specific exhaustion of people who have to decide what comes next. What comes next takes longer. But it comes. The council reform session happens 6 weeks after. Qui-Gon chairs it, which would have been unthinkable a year ago, a Jedi whose institutional heterodoxy had kept him off the council for a decade, now sitting at its center because events had vindicated his instincts twice in 10 years in ways that were impossible to argue with. He chairs it with the same ease he brings to everything, unhurried, letting the room find its own pace, and the discussion that follows is the longest the council has held on a single subject in living memory. The code is not abolished. No one proposes abolishing it. What changes is the interpretation of 2 words that have been doing enormous damage for 3,000 years by being read too narrowly. Attachment and detachment. The argument, Qui-Gon's argument, the one he has been making in various forms since before Anakin was born, is simple in its structure and had been resisted for decades because simple arguments are easier to resist than complicated ones. Fear-based attachment and love-based attachment are not the same thing. A Jedi who clings to someone because losing them would destroy the Jedi's own sense of self is dangerous. A Jedi who loves someone and has made peace with the impermanence of that love is not. The code was written to address the first, and had been applied to both, and the difference between those 2 things is the entire story of what nearly happened. Anakin sits in the observation gallery and does not speak. He has given his testimony, specific, precise, the account of Palpatine's methods and the years of counter-operation, and the council has listened with the attention of people who are using what they hear to build something, rather than simply to record it. His part in the formal session is done. What he is watching now is the result of it. Mace speaks last, which is not usual, and what he says is not long. "We have spent centuries being afraid of the wrong thing," Mace said. "We taught our people to fear love. We should have taught them to fear what they become without it." A pause. That changes today. The chamber is quiet. Qui-Gon looks at the ceiling briefly, with the expression of a man who has been making a particular argument for 30 years and has just heard it accepted, and the expression is not triumphant. It is simply tired, and then, slowly, something that is the opposite of tired. The wedding is not a secret. This is the part that requires adjustment, not from Anakin, who has wanted nothing secret for 10 years, but from Padmé, who spent enough years in politics to have developed a professional suspicion of public declarations. She agrees, eventually, because Anakin makes the argument she cannot counter, that a union built in secrecy becomes a vulnerability, and they have both lived long enough with vulnerabilities. The ceremony is on Naboo, which is where it should always have been. The lake house, the same stone and wide windows, the mountains behind and the water in front. A small gathering, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, a handful of senators Padmé trusts, her family from Naboo, and one very old Jedi Master, who arrives without announcement and sits in the back and watches the proceedings with eyes that miss nothing, and say nothing until afterward. Obi-Wan stands beside Anakin. Not behind him, not across from him, beside him, the way he has been positioned in almost every significant moment of the past 10 years, and Anakin looks at him once, briefly, before the ceremony begins, and Obi-Wan meets the look with the small, precise expression that means "I know" without requiring the words. The ceremony itself is short. Naboo tradition doesn't require length, it requires sincerity, which is a different standard and in some ways a higher one. Padmé's hands in his are steady. Her eyes are clear. She says the words with the specificity of a woman who has written legislation and knows the difference between language that commits and language that gestures, and the words commit. He says his. Obi-Wan makes a sound beside him that is very quiet and not entirely composed, and then recovers, and when Anakin glances at him, his face is entirely neutral, except for the fact that his eyes are bright. "Allergies," Obi-Wan says quietly, to no one. Qui-Gon, on Obi-Wan's other side, coughs. The wedding is small. A balcony on Coruscant, at dusk. The sky going amber and deep blue in layers above the Senate district. Padmé wears something simple. She has been fighting political battles in formal dress since she was 14, and has developed a precise appreciation for the occasions that don't require it. Her hair is down. She looks at Anakin across the small gathered group with the expression she has worn since he told her the truth 3 months ago. The one that contains both the weight of what he carried and the decision, made clearly and without drama, that this is where she stands. Obi-Wan officiates. He does it with the slightly self-conscious dignity of a man performing a ceremony he believes in and finds slightly absurd simultaneously, which is his relationship to most things he loves. Padmé's pregnancy is not yet showing. The twins will come in 7 months, born into a galaxy that does not require them to be hidden, raised by parents who are not hunted, growing up with the knowledge of what they are and where they come from, and a father who is present and whole. The ceremony is brief. The sun goes down over Coruscant's endless skyline as it finishes, the last light going gold across the buildings, and Anakin looks out at it, this city, this sky, this specific quality of evening light that he last saw from behind a respirator on a planet he was leaving to burn something down. He breathes the open air. Padmé's hand finds his, warm and certain. He had vowed, on the first night on Naboo, not to kill Palpatine but to unmake him. He kept that vow. He had moved, at 9 years old, to place his mother somewhere safe before the desert took her. He kept that vow. He had promised himself, in the dark alcove of the temple sublevel, in the hour before dawn, over a terminal and 10 years of careful, patient, unglamorous work, that this time, he would protect the people he loved before the fire arrived. He kept that vow too. The stars come out above Coruscant one by one, in the places where the sky is dark enough to show them. He got to keep the promise. Yoda finds Anakin afterward, near the water. The old master moves to stand beside him with the slowness that is not frailty but precision, each step deliberate. Measuring the ground before committing to it, the walk of someone who has learned that the careful path and the correct path are usually the same path. They stand together at the lake's edge for a moment. "A question," Yoda said. "Long I have had it." "I know," Anakin said. "From the beginning. Different you were. A child's body, not a child's weight." Anakin looks at the lake. The water holds the mountains in perfect inversion, the gray peaks and the sky between them reproduced beneath the surface without distortion. "Would it change anything?" he asked. "What you did. What the council decided." Yoda considers this with the gravity he brings to questions that deserve it. "No," he said. "What you were, we could feel. What you chose, we could see." A pause. "What you came from, a different matter. A private matter." The ancient eyes find him, and they are not asking. They are confirming. "Suffered, you have. For a long time, before this life began." Anakin says nothing. "At peace," Yoda said. "Are you?" He thinks about the throne room, the fire, Luke's face, refusing to look away, the smell of sand and the sound of Shmi's voice, and a straw mattress, and small, unblemished hands. "Getting there," he said. Yoda nods once, slowly. "Good," he said. "Good." He moves back toward the house, each step deliberate and sure, and Anakin stands at the water's edge a moment longer before following. The light moves across the lake the way light does, without hurry, without drama, covering everything evenly, the way good things tend to move when they finally have room. 11 years after that. The balcony of the Naboo house faces east, which means it catches the morning light before anything else does, and in the summer the light comes early and stays long, and the lake holds it the way it holds everything. Without distortion, without commentary. Anakin and Obi-Wan sit in 2 chairs that have been on this balcony long enough to have shaped themselves to the people who occupy them. Obi-Wan's hair is gray at the temples. Anakin's is not yet, but there is something in his face that reads older than his years, not worn, not damaged, just deep. The look of someone who has accumulated more life than the years account for. Below them, at the lake's edge, 2 children argue about something with the complete commitment children bring to arguments about nothing. The girl is winning. She usually wins. Her brother is taller and louder, but she is faster and more precise. And these are the important variables. They are 7 years old, both of them, and they have never been separated. And they do not know what it would mean to be separated, and they will not. Obi-Wan watches them with his cup of tea in both hands. Luke is going to end up in the water, he said. Leia pushed him in last time, Anakin said. He went back anyway. Optimistic child, he gets it from his mother. Below, Luke makes his argument louder, which achieves nothing. Leia's response is brief and final, and Luke considers it, and then, with the specific resignation of someone who has lost the argument and decided to find something else to do, turns and walks toward the water's edge and sits down to look at it instead. After a moment, Leia follows and sits beside him. The argument is apparently over. Obi-Wan is quiet for a moment. "We did all right," he said. Not a question, not a declaration, just a fact, stated in the plain way of someone who has stopped needing it to be more than what it is. Anakin looks at the two children sitting together at the water's edge, shoulder to shoulder, the argument dissolved and the morning still going, the lake holding the sky in its flat and perfect mirror. "Yes," he said. The morning has the particular quality of Naboo mornings in late summer, the air still carrying the cool of the night before, the lake surface glassy enough to read by, the mountains in the distance sharp-edged before the heat of the day softens them. Anakin has been awake since before the light. Obi-Wan has been awake since before Anakin, which is not a competition, but is a fact. The way most things between them are facts that don't require discussion. Padmé's inside. At the desk she keeps near the east window, doing the work that never fully stops even here, the correspondence, the committee briefings, the careful maintenance of a political life that has, in the years since Palpatine's fall, become something other than survival. She takes her tea at the desk and reads with the focused efficiency of a woman who long ago made her peace with the idea that rest and work occupy the same body and simply have to negotiate. She will come out when the work is done, which will be before midday, and the four of them will eat lunch at the long stone table. And Leia will have opinions about the food, and Luke will eat whatever is in front of him, and it will be ordinary in the way that only very fortunate things are ordinary. Obi-Wan refills his cup from the pot between their chairs without asking whether Anakin wants any, because he already knows the answer, and pours a second cup without being asked. Anakin takes it. "Qui-Gon's next visit," Obi-Wan said after a while. "He mentioned the 3rd week of the month. He mentioned," Anakin said, "the 3rd week of the month the last 2 times, and arrived in the 2nd week both times. He finds the 2nd week more interesting. He finds whatever week he's already traveling more convenient and declines to update his communications." "That is," Obi-Wan said, with the deliberate gravity of a man choosing his words carefully, a very accurate description of Qui-Gon Jinn. Below them, Leia has found a flat stone and is attempting to skip it across the lake surface with a precision that is entirely characteristic. The first throw goes wide. She studies the result and adjusts her angle, and the second stone skips 4 times before sinking. She does not celebrate this. She simply notes it and reaches for another stone. Luke watches her, and then finds his own stone and throws it, and it sinks immediately, without so much as a bounce, and he laughs at himself with the easy generosity of a child who finds his own failures genuinely funny. Obi-Wan watches this. "She's going to be formidable," he said. "She already is," Anakin said. "She's been formidable since she was 4 and told the groundskeeper his planting schedule was inefficient. She wasn't wrong. She was entirely right. That's what made it formidable." The force around the lake house is a thing Anakin notices every morning without meaning to. The specific texture of it. The way it moves through 4 people who carry it differently. Padmé's presence in it is warm and steady and largely unconscious. The force working through her in the way it works through most people who don't know it's there. Visible to someone looking for it. Invisible to her. A brightness she generates without trying. Luke's is open and wide and pulls at everything around it the way a window left ajar pulls at curtains. Enormous potential. Entirely uncontrolled. The force of a boy who hasn't learned yet that he has it, and wouldn't know what to do with the information if he did. Leia's is different. It has always been different. Tighter. More deliberate. as though something in her knows without knowing that it must be managed, rather than simply had. She is 7 years old, and she does not have the language for what she carries, but she carries it with the specific discipline of someone who has already, instinctively, decided that things which can cause damage should be handled carefully. Anakin watches her throw another stone and thinks, she is going to be extraordinary. He thinks this without grief, without the weight of futures he is no longer building toward. He thinks it the way you think something that is simply, plainly true. The way you think the morning is clear, or the water is cold, as a fact about the world that belongs to the world, and not to fear. Do you ever think about it? Obi-Wan said, the other version. He doesn't specify which other version. He doesn't need to. There is only one version that sits between them when they are quiet enough for it. The one that ran its course in a different iteration of the same decades, that ended in fire and armor, and a galaxy rebuilt from damage that didn't have to be. Sometimes, Anakin said. Less than I used to. Obi-Wan turns his cup in his hands. The gesture is exactly what it has always been, the outward sign of something working internally, the habit of a man who thinks better when his hands have something to do. I think about the version of you I would have trained, he said. Alone, without Qui-Gon. A pause. I was 25. I had no idea what I was doing. You would have figured it out. I would have been very methodical and very correct, and very certain I was helping, and I would have gotten a great deal wrong. He says it without self-pity, with the flat accuracy of someone who has had enough years to look at their younger self honestly. The code as I understood it then was brittle, in the specific places where it needed not to be. You were 25, and doing your best with what you had. Yes, a pause, so were you, in the other version, doing your best with what you had. Anakin is quiet for a moment. It is a thing that has been said between them before, in different forms at different hours, the specific acknowledgement that neither of them failed the other so much as both of them were failed by the architecture of a world that hadn't built enough exits. He has heard it enough times now that it has moved from the category of things that require careful receiving into the category of things he actually believes, most mornings, in the bones of it rather than just the mind. Most mornings. It's different, Anakin said, knowing you had the thought. It's true regardless, Obi-Wan said. I thought it was worth saying out loud again. Luke has given up on stone skipping and is now standing at the very edge of the water with his feet precisely at the boundary between wet and dry, testing exactly how close he can get without crossing it. This is a game he plays at least twice per visit. The answer is always the same. He always crosses it, always ends up with wet feet, always seems genuinely surprised by this outcome. And yet the game recurs with the faithful consistency of someone who believes this time will be different. Leia is watching him with the expression of someone who has already calculated the outcome and is waiting for it to arrive. He's going to fall in, Obi-Wan said. He's going to step in, Anakin said. Deliberately. Eventually. Because he decided to. He always does. The distinction matters to you. Luke makes very few actual accidents. He just makes decisions that look like accidents until you watch him long enough. Obi-Wan considers this. That, he said carefully, is either very reassuring or very concerning. Both, Anakin said. Usually both. As though to confirm this, Luke takes one deliberate step forward into the water, looks down at his submerged foot with an expression of complete satisfaction, and turns to say something to Leia. Whatever it is makes her put down her stone and roll her eyes with the specific theatrical exhaustion of a 7-year-old who has been dealing with this exact person for her entire life and has made her peace with continuing to do so. She says something back. Luke laughs. Padmé comes out at the 11th hour, as expected, carrying her own cup and settling into the chair on Anakin's other side with the ease of someone who belongs in the space and knows it. She looks at the lake first. She always looks at the lake first. Before anything else, the way some people check the sky. And then, at the children. And the expression that moves across her face is the one that has no public equivalent. The one that exists only here and is not for policy or presentation, or the weight of everything that requires her to be precise and defended. It is just her face. doing what it does when she is happy. "Luke's wet," she said. "He's satisfied," Anakin said. "He's both," Obi-Wan said. Padmé looks at them both with the expression she reserves for when they agree on something in exactly the same register, which she finds, she has said this more than once, slightly unnerving, like hearing one voice come from two directions. Then she looks back at the lake. "Good morning," she said to all of it. The water, the mountains, the children at the shore. The ordinary specific weight of a morning that belongs to no one but themselves. The mountains hold their reflection in the lake without comment. The morning continues. There is a moment, late in the afternoon, when the light is at the particular angle that turns the lake to gold and the shadows of the mountains have reached the house and the children have come up from the water and been fed and are now somewhere inside in the sustained industry of children who have decided to build something and are gathering materials, and the balcony is quiet. Anakin sits alone for a few minutes. Not lonely, alone in the way that has a quality to it, the way a room is different when it has been full and is resting. Obi-Wan has gone inside. Padmé is with the children. Qui-Gon is 3 days away and coming at a different time than he said, and the evening will bring dinner and noise and Luke's recounting of everything that happened at the lake that morning, delivered with the certainty of someone reporting breaking news, and Leia's corrections, delivered in the tone of someone who was there and has a better memory, and would like the record to reflect that. He sits in the afternoon light, and he breathes. He thinks about a boy on a straw mattress looking at his own hands. He thinks about a man in armor who spent 23 years at the center of a machinery of fear and called it purpose, because purpose was the only thing that kept the rest of it from becoming unbearable. He thinks about a throne room and fire and a face refusing to look away. He thinks, it held. The thread he pulled taut in a hangar on Naboo, in a meadow behind a lake house, in a council antechamber with a boy whose categories kept failing, and a man who asked the room to make room. It held. Across 10 years and 2 lifetimes and every moment when it would have been easier to let something break. It held. He closes his eyes. From inside the house, Leia's voice, clear and exact and carrying the particular authority of a 7-year-old who has just identified a structural problem with whatever Luke is proposing and would like everyone to acknowledge this before they proceed. Luke's voice, responding, optimistic, a pause. Then both of them. Together, calling for help. Anakin opens his eyes. He gets up from the chair and goes inside, and the afternoon holds the lake in its long gold light, unhurried, the water doing what water does, reflecting everything, disturbing nothing, keeping its own counsel about what it has seen. The light moves across the water the way light does, without hurry, without drama, covering everything evenly, the way good things tend to move when they finally have room. It is enough. It has always been. Underneath everything, exactly. Enough. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.